How's it going, everyone? I'm here back with another one, and today we're talking about something a little different. It's a little bit of a curveball. Normally, we like to talk about things that will increase our damage, but the thing we're talking about today actually decreases our damage a little bit, but in return, the raid gains extra healing, specifically on the tank. The way this works is in a situation where you're waiting for energy to regenerate, a situation where normally you would bear weave or cast Gift of the Wild, instead, you cast healing spells. Unsurprisingly, weaving in resto spells like this is known as resto weaving. The interesting thing about this playstyle is it's very similar to wrath weaving. For anybody who's unfamiliar with what that is, it's basically using the procs you get from predatory strikes on instant cast wraths to fish for omen procs. But the talent itself says nature spells. It doesn't just say damaging spells, it just says nature spells, which means regrowth counts, healing touch counts, nourish counts, even rebirth counts, and cyclone. All of those spells count as nature spells, so they can all be cast instantly using this talent, and they can all also proc Omen of Clarity. So Predatory Strikes, obviously very important for DPS in general, also very important for Restoweave. That's not that big of a deal because you're going to take that talent anyway for DPS. The other talent that's very important for Restoweave is one that we have to go out of our way to get. We have to drop a couple of points somewhere else to be able to pick up this talent. That talent is Nurturing Instinct. Normally, this is seen as a PvP talent because of that 20% healing received in cat form, but the first part of the talent is the part that we're interested in for Restoweave. Increases your healing by 70% of your agility. That's a lot. In my gear, my regular DPS gear with no changes at all, just regular DPS gear, unbuffed, 1000 healing power, just because of this talent. There's a few different potential talent setups you can run for resto weaving, but as long as you have Nurturing Instinct, you can resto weave. So like set your talents up however you normally would, and then find a way to fit in Nurturing Instinct. Whatever points you got to drop elsewhere, do that so you can get Nurturing Instinct, and then you can resto weave. This is the way that I did it. Normally I Lacerate Weave, so all I did was I took 2 points out of Protector of the Pack and put them into Nurturing Instinct. On fights where I don't have to resto weave, I just Lacerate Weave as normal because I still have some extra bear attack power because of Protector of the Pack. Then in fights where I do resto weave, I swap out the Glyph of Savage Roar for Glyph of Regrowth, and then I cast a Regrowth on the tank before the pull, so that every Regrowth I cast on the tank for the duration of the fight is boosted by the Glyph. That 20% extra healing from the Glyph applies to the entirety of the heal. It's the initial heal, and also all of the hot ticks are boosted by 20% as well. So that's one potential build you could run. There's another build you could run for a fight like Kologarn, where you are unable to shred, so instead you pick up improved Mangle, and you don't put any points into shredding attacks at all, and Mangle becomes your primary builder. You could put a point into Imp Rejuv as well, or you could put that point into Furor, so you have 4 out of 5 here instead of 3 out of 5, but that's situational. It depends on whether or not you're going to be casting Rejuv. If you do cast Rejuv, sure, put the point there. If not, then just put it into Furor or wherever else you want. But the point of this build is a fight like Kologarn where you cannot shred. The damage is not going to be as good. It's not going to be nearly as good as a shred build. You can't extend the duration of rip from Glyph of Shred because you're not shredding. So your rip isn't going to last as long, so timing's going to be a little tight. You might not be able to bite at all. I have a point of Feral Aggression here because a point had to go somewhere to advance down the tree. So I just kind of stuck it there. It could easily go into like Survival Instincts instead or something like that. But this build is really only useful for Kologarn. I would not recommend running this normally because you're just going to lose too much damage by using Mangle instead of Shred. There is something to be said for the Idol of the Corruptor though. The agility buff that you get from this idol will give you around 113 or so healing power. Here, we'll do the math just to show. So the proc itself is 162 agility, and then multiply that by 70% because of Nurturing Instinct, and that's 113.4 additional healing power because of the agility proc. So you can run the Mangle build on Kologarn and run this idol and get a little bit of extra healing power because you're losing a ton of damage anyway, so you might as well maximize your healing on a fight like that. I personally don't think that 113 additional healing power is going to be worth it because let's look at Regrowth for a second here. You go to Regrowth on Wowhead, you can see the coefficients. You can see that on the initial heal, spell power mod for the initial heal is 0.538. So that means 53.8% of your spell power or your healing power is boosting the initial heal. And then the secondary effect is the hot. The spell power mod for the secondary effect is 0.188, so only 18.8% of your healing power is getting added to the ticks. 113 extra healing power, that's not going to get you very much extra on the hot ticks. It may get you a decent amount on the initial heal. It's going to be like 60 something extra healing, but that's not really that much. To have to mangle every 12 seconds in a normal situation, that might not be worth it. But on a fight like Kologarn, where you're mangling all the time anyway, like you might as well. And then the other spec that we're going to look at is a more Rejuve focused spec. I don't have any points at all into Protector of the Pack, and instead of going 5 out of 5 Furor, you go 3 out of 5 Furor, and then the 1 point that would have been in Protector of the Pack, you throw that into Imp Rejuve, and then the other 2 points that would have been in Furor to max it out also go into Imp Rejuve, and that increases your Rejuve healing by 15%. Now, this is a build that I have not tested yet. So far, when I have been resto weaving, it's been a single spell. Primarily, you're popping out of cat form, or at least I was popping out of cat form, casting an instant regrowth, and going right back into cat form. However, I did cast Rejuve 3 times in our Vezax kill, and the average heal tick of those 3 times, I'm going to bring up the calculator again. The average heal tick, as you can see here, was 475 without the talent. And the average heal tick for regrowth was 518 with the glyph. That's with the 20% boost on the glyph. So if we go to the calculator for a second here, and we go 475.3 times 1.15 for the 15% extra healing that I would have gotten if I had the talent, and we see that it would have ticked for 546.595 if I had the talent. So potentially, you could pop out of cat form, cast an instant regrowth, follow it up with a rejuve on the same target or anywhere else, and then go back to cat form, essentially do like a double weave with heals. You'll definitely lose some damage because you're spending more time in human form and less time in cat form, but your healing would be increased. So in a situation like Vezax hard mode, where you want to throw a little bit of extra healing on the melee or on the tank or whatever, or like when the Animus is up, if you have 2 tanks, if you have 1 tank on Vezax, 1 tank on the Animus, you can throw hots on both tanks and get a little bit more out of those heals by having points into improved rejuve. But again, this is not a talent setup that I have tested yet, so I don't yet know if it is worth it to lose damage from not being in cat form as much in order to gain the healing from Imp Rejuve. This is just a potential build that you could run if you want to get a little more healing done by not just using regrowth, you would also use rejuve as well. But again, haven't tested it yet. So here is the log from our Vezax kill. That was the first time that we killed Vezax, and as you can see, I'm here as damage. And then we scroll on down the damage. You see me here just under one of the Fury Warriors, just above the Combat Rogue, above the Demo Lock, above both the Boomkins. So not last on damage. Pretty close to the rest of the melee with Resto Weaving. We're going to scroll up here and go to the damage done. I was still able to keep up with the Fury Warrior and the Combat Rogue, and I was just under the Unholy Death Knight as well. Not too far off. As you see here, I did 2.25 million total damage. The Enhancement Shaman and the Fury Warrior did 2.56 and 2.8 million damage. So I'm not really that far behind. Like, that is a lot of damage. You know, it's like almost 500,000. But like, I would say that's an acceptable amount. That's an acceptable place to be, considering that I was Resto Weaving and I still parsed an 89 on the fight. And then we're going to scroll up and we're going to look at the healing. And we see on here that the Holy Paladin obviously did the most amount of healing. The Resto Druid did a ton of healing. The Resto Shaman did a good amount of healing. And then both of the Disc Priests did some good healing as well. And there I am. I did just over half the healing of the Disc Priests and just under half the healing of the Resto Shaman as a Feral Druid. 282.9k healing on the fight. That's 283,000 healing that the other healers didn't have to do because I was regrowthing the tanks. This is the potential power of Resto Weaving. And I messed up a bunch of times too. I capped energy a few times. I popped out of cat form to like heal, and like I tried to heal while I was still on GCD, and then I went back to cat form without healing, so I lost damage and I lost healing from that one. I made enough mistakes on damage where I was, you know, not as high as I could have been, and I still parsed 89 while I was Resto Weaving. And I made some mistakes with healing as well, and I still did that much healing. This is some pretty good potential. The fact that I was able to do that much healing while making mistakes and not having things fully optimized, and I was still able to do that amount of damage while Resto Weaving. And at one point I had to battle res too. I did a battle res during the fight. You can see on here that I did cast a Rebirth during the fight. There was a 1 Rebirth that I cast. I cast it kind of towards the end-ish, so I did have to run out, so I lost uptime. But still, like, the fact that I was able to do all that while Resto Weaving and making mistakes, 89 damage parse, 283,000 healing, while making mistakes, not fully optimized, still kind of new at doing Resto Weaving, and I was still able to do those numbers, just shows the potential of Resto Weave in general. And again, Vezax is the fight to do this, because the way that Vezax works is the healers have their mana regen completely torpedoed. Like, their mana regen is just in the gutter because of the way that the fight works, the mechanics of the fight. However, if we take a look at Improved Leader of the Pack, read that last line of that talent. In addition, you gain 8% of your maximum mana, not base mana, maximum mana, when you benefit from this heal. So when you heal yourself with Leader of the Pack, you gain 8% mana. So a Restoweave Feral Druid has 0 mana issues on a fight like Vezax. So because of that, adding in those extra heals on the tank when mana is not a problem for us at all takes some of that load off of the other healers and allows them to conserve some mana for later on in the fight. Of course, the longer the fight lasts, the harder it's going to be for the healers. A lot of wipes happen because the healers go out of mana and they can't heal the tanks anymore. If you are a Feral Druid that Resto weaves, you are easing some of that healing strain on the healers. They have to do less healing so they can conserve mana and potentially turn a wipe into a kill because the healers didn't run out of mana because you were chipping in with heals on the tank. Alright, what we'll do now is we'll look at a few macros that I like to use when I Restoweave that make things a little easier. These may change over time. As I get more experience and more practice with Restoweaving, I may decide to change some things up, but so far, this is what I have come up with that makes the most sense. For me, I like to have a spell power weapon that I swap to before I do any healing at all, because you get a lot more out of spell power weapons than you do out of agility weapons when it comes to healing power. For example, right now, I just got my regular DPS gear on, 1024 bonus healing. As soon as I equip this spell power staff, which is only a 225 staff, by the way, my healing power jumped up literally exactly 500. An entire third of my healing power is just coming from the weapon when I do it that way. But that's a pretty significant change that you can make, is getting a spell power weapon and having some sort of macro to equip it before you're going to heal. The way that I found that works best is to bake it into your finishers. I have macros for all 3 finishers that will equip my spell power weapon if I hold down the modifier key while I am casting the finisher. All 3 of these macros have the finisher first, and then after that is the equip line in the macro with the modifier in there as well. In this case, for all 3 of them, I used Alt as my modifier. So when I press any of these macros with Alt held down, it will cast the finisher, and then it will equip my spell power weapon after that. The reason that I found that it makes sense to do it this way is you're already on GCD when you cast the finisher, so that's a pretty good time to switch to a different weapon, is when you're already on GCD from having cast an ability. And also, after a finisher is usually when you're getting Predatory Strikes procs anyway. And then if you are using a macro to equip a spell power weapon, you're going to want to have another macro that will re-equip your normal weapon when you go back to cat form, which is what this one does. And the last one we're going to look at is just a focus macro for the spell that you use most often when you Restoweave. For me, it's a Regrowth. So by default, this will cast Regrowth at my focus target. But if I decide that I want to cast Regrowth on something other than my focus target, all I have to do is mouse over the target and hold down the modifier, which I have designated in the macro, which in this case is Control. So if I just moused over a random player and I just hold down Control and press the keybind, it'll heal that player. And then since I don't have a focus target right now, if I just press it, it just doesn't work. It just straight up doesn't work. But if I set this random mage to my focus target, and then I cast Regrowth, it'll be on the mage. But then I hold down the modifier key and then press the keybind again, and it'll go on the other target instead. You can go pretty easily back and forth between casting things on your focus target and casting things on your mouse over just by having that modifier key. When it comes to playstyle, one of the important things to remember is that the whole point of all this is to get more Omen of Clarity procs. It's just that the way that we're going about it just happens to benefit the rest of the raid as well. The other ways that you normally get Omen procs are selfish, basically. They're ways that only benefit us. When you're Wrath Weaving, for example, you're casting out a Wrath, and that Wrath is doing barely any damage because we don't have any spell power. That Wrath isn't really doing very good damage, and we're just kind of hoping that it procs Omen of Clarity. The other thing that we do is cast Gift of the Wild, which nobody actually needs mid-fight. Nobody needs their Gift of the Wild to be refreshed mid-fight, so literally the only reason to do that is for ourselves to get an Omen of Clarity proc. Resto weaving is the one thing that we can do with our downtime that actually benefits the rest of the raid and isn't completely selfish. Obviously, the point is to get Omen of Clarity procs. It just so happens that the way that we're doing that, i.e. casting heals, happens to benefit the raid as a result. It's sort of that weird hybrid playstyle where, like, we are being rewarded for not being selfish. We're sometimes being rewarded for not being selfish. We don't always get Omen of Clarity procs from these heals, but when we do, it feels really nice because you did something to help and you got rewarded for it. So that's one of the things that you can kind of think about. The other thing to think about is, like, is this what Blizzard meant for us to do the whole time? Because look at our talents, right? We've got Nurturing Instinct. It's not like super, super deep in the feral tree, but it's a ways down there, you know? You might make the case that it's supposed to be a PvP talent. And then we've got, obviously, Improved Leader of the Pack with the regen and stuff like that. Like, why else would we need to have regen? If we were designed to be in either cat form or bear form the whole time as a feral druid, why would we need this mana regen thing? Why would that even be necessary? And then the other thing to look at is Predatory Strikes. Is that also supposed to be a PvP-oriented talent with the instant cast nature spell thing? And then Heart of the Wild, of course, increases our intellect, which is our mana pool, obviously. With all these things combined, did Blizzard mean for feral druids to be hybrid healers this entire time, and we're just figuring it out now? Or are these just PvP talents and I'm reading too much into it? Either way, it feels like we're rediscovering something about the class that was intended the whole time that we just forgot about or overlooked. Okay, so like, how do you play it though? How do you play Restoweave? What's the rotation like? Well, it kind of depends. That's a terrible answer. I know it's super anticlimactic, but it does depend on what is needed of you. Depends on how you fit into the healing comp. If you're actually like a part of the healing comp, if they're relying on your heals, you're probably going to have to go with the higher healing option. If you're not really part of the healing comp, if you're just there for kind of supplementary heals, then you can probably go with the higher damage option because that is less heal focused and you are losing less damage by doing it that way. Let's start with the higher healing option. That one is based off of the third spec that we looked at earlier, the one that takes Imp Rejuv. You got 3 out of 5 Furor, and you got 3 out of 3 Imp Rejuv. In this particular setup, you are going to Restoweave every single time you are low on energy. Every time you have downtime in the rotation, a time where normally you would Bear Weave or Flower Shift. Instead, you are going to Restoweave. The only thing that will change is your spell selection. If you do have a Predatory Strikes proc, you're probably going to spend that on Regrowth or Healing Touch. If you don't have a Predatory Strikes proc, you're probably going to use it on a Rejuve or Life Bloom, maybe even a Nourish. But either way, you are Restoweaving every single time you have downtime in the normal cat rotation. And like I said, your spell selection is the only thing that changes, and the only thing that changes it is whether or not you have a Predatory Strikes proc. The other option, which we were talking about, the higher damage option, is more when you are supplementary heals. You are not actually factored into the healing comp. You're just kind of there to help out and chip in. In that situation, you're basically only going to Restoweave when you actually have a Predatory Strikes proc. And you're probably going to spend it on like a Regrowth. And other than that, if you have downtime in the rotation, but you don't have a Predatory Strikes proc, you're just going to Bear Weave like you normally would. The only time you're actually going to Restoweave is when you have a Predatory Strikes proc. And you're going to probably cast it on the tank. Other than that, you're basically a Bear Weave druid that heals sometimes. All in all, in conclusion, Restoweave has potential. But potential means almost nothing. Just because something has potential doesn't mean it's actually good. It just means it could be good, but we gotta see. Like, we'll see. It might be good. It doesn't look like it's gonna be bad, but it could be bad. But it could be good. But it could be bad. But it could be good. But anyway, stay tuned as I do more testing myself and as others do testing and let me know what their results are. We'll find out together if Restoweaving is actually good. We'll find out if it lives up to its potential. Thanks for watching. You can catch me on Twitch at twitch.tv/table_slam. And a special announcement, pretty soon I will be streaming everything to Twitch and everything to YouTube simultaneously. If that's something you're interested in, then tune in to whichever platform you prefer to watch it on. I'll be able to see chat for both of them. But anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.